So this is the audio file for awakening through the core emotional issue that you have identified in this lifetime. And just before we begin, I wanted to share with you a quote from Adyashanti. Wake up or perish. The world's problems are by and large human problems, the unavoidable consequence of ego's sleepwalking. If we care to look, all the signs are present to suggest that we are not only sleepwalking, but at times borderline insane as well. In a manner of speaking, we have lost, or at the very least forgotten, our souls. And we try very, very hard not to notice, because we don't want to see how asleep we are, how desolate our condition really is. So we blindly carry on, driven by forces we do not recognize or understand or even acknowledge. We are no doubt at a very critical point in time. Our world hangs in the balance, and a precarious balance it is. Awakening to reality is no longer a possibility, it is an imperative. We have sailed the ship of delusion about as far as she can carry us. We have run her shore and now find ourselves shipwrecked on an increasingly desolate land. Our options have imploded. Wake up or perish. In the spiritual call of our times, did we ever need more motivation than this? And yet all is eternally well, and more well than can be imagined. This is the book, The Way of Liberation, which I really recommend, from Adyashanti. So I read that paragraph really because it is this sense of urgency of really meeting what I would call the core place of separateness in us. The core place of inner division, where we feel cut off from that felt sense of wholeness, our innate nature, that felt sense of oneness, of love as our true self, not as a nice fancy ideology, but as our essence. And in those places where we feel cut off, we develop issues. And in this case, for the purpose of this healing, emotional issues that of course are karmic, they're ancient, they've been going on for lifetimes, but also they are perhaps genetic, ancestral, and then also cultural, social, environmental, from just parental conditioning in this lifetime. So what is required here for this group is a real depth of honesty to be really truthful about where we're hurting, really, on a fundamental human level, the place where we most go into hurt. And that inner place of separateness, basically what starts to happen is it gets to a point where when you're no longer in the hiding game, when you're no longer in the transcending, avoiding rat wheel game, and you just start to wake up to your true nature, it almost becomes more apparent where you go into division. It becomes more highlighted, and going against that sort of truth becomes acutely painful. So on one level you could say suffering gets greater because we've exposed it. We've also experienced what it is to feel this that's just present and awake and aware. So it becomes highlighted, the places in us that are not in alignment with that recognition, that divine alignment that is our essence. And the highlight really can show up as acute areas of suffering, but that's a call to come to attention. So that's why I read this paragraph, is that it's this sense of wake up or perish. It's really a case of we need to do our part for healing the division that's reflected in the whole, in the state of the world right now. To the point where we really have to meet in ourselves where we've been shut down. And we can use the emotional pain as a bridge, a sense of coming into the honest integrity of emotional intelligence, emotional honesty, helps us actually open to feeling. Because often part of the problem is that we spend so much of life going with a mainstream thread, basically avoiding recognizing what we actually feel. we have many informational inputs around telling us what we think or we should think, and conditioning us into our opinions and our sort of mental response to reality. But there's very little to give us the space to allow the vulnerability of actually just being present to what we feel, because it's a doorway, and that is a doorway that you can meet that threshold and go through. So really we have to come to that place of rawness, which says, okay, I'm willing to just feel what's here. I'm willing to just feel what's showing up. And that might be very, very painful, because the consequence, the price you pay of not being willing to feel that is disease, imbalance, injury, accident, quite dramatic wake-up calls often for people. The consequence of denial of what's been beneath the surface and how we're creating our reality, because it's been created from our karmic unconsciousness. It's been filtered through that. So what I wanted to really bridge in as we go into this in-depth protocol healing is a sense of just emotional honesty, of acknowledging, yes, there may be vastness of freedom, and you can touch into it through meditation and sort of experiences, but we want to be living that freedom on a day-to-day embodied level. And the places that we aren't start to scream at us. They start to really call attention the deeper we go towards the light, you could say. So what we really need to do here is have this approach of actually meeting the dark, meeting what's been hidden beneath the surface, or the painful parts that are hurting in us. And like in a psychotherapy context, we would call this, the inner child stuff, the unprocessed, vulnerable, fragile, nonsensical, non-rational sort of pain. And for some of us in the course of this healing, we might really meet that inner child stuff, which, by saying that, it's more like abandonment, loss, fear of abandonment, those sort of patterns, those feelings of such extreme childhood trauma stuff, that might also really appear. So I'm sort of speaking it now so that we can really give permission to whatever wants to show up with that. So some of our most deepest emotional issues, they might not feel necessarily very emotional, for example. They might feel you might start with a sense of numbness, a sense of shutdown. And you don't necessarily have a mental label for that deepest core emotional pattern. You might just feel like, oh, this is just the area I just don't want to feel. And that's a good place to start from. So in us now, I would say, let's just begin this tracking process together by really acknowledging perhaps the most difficult emotion. And we could say that's perhaps something like despair. And it's pretty intense to experience despair because it has a sense of hopelessness in it, like there's just no way out. So we need to be willing to look through those veils, through the perspective of that particular emotional issue, and to really kind of find out what's its worldview, what's it believing in. For example, take a pattern of loss. It just feels everything's going to be lost, everything's going to be taken away, you're going to be left with nothing and no one. Loss has a perspective of such a survival trauma energy to it. Devastating, tragic loss, it's the sense of you just cannot be redeemed. It has this anti-life quality that just loses faith in the quality and the existence of love and wholeness and union. It has this deep pain of separateness in it. So you might not know it is lost to begin with. You might just have a certain clamping, primal angst, tension in your system, which just feels like you just can't let go of something and you don't know what it is. So what I'd say is, start with just what's here showing up, because the healing work itself will elicit that which is ready to transform. Even if we feel we're not ready for it, we're here experiencing the healing. The divine knows where to work. The divine knows exactly where to work. Even if we don't consciously bridge to that, or have a mental label for it. And it's okay if we don't conceptualize this and we just directly feel it. So we really need to give permission for that, to be open to just the rawness of feeling. And it might just be a certain numbness, an area that just feels blocked, or I just can't breathe there, or a certain heaviness. So start with the raw basic facts, because the body doesn't lie. So just know that the healing is going to be bridging you into it. So ideally you listen to this audio file in real time. It's not important at all that you see it. This is just a format so that it can get the audio across to you. So I would suggest really just going within and more utilising the words to point yourself back to the source, rather than looking at the video and getting your conscience to go out. You really want to start that process of what you call pratyahara, where you are starting to go in, kind of listening from presence. So you're applying it as we speak about it. You can just kind of go, okay, well, what's here? And don't look for some kind of extreme emotion. It's not that you have to be experiencing extreme emotion to get in touch with the deepest core emotional pattern. It might just be an energy of resistance. But I wanted to make one clarification first of all. When we talk about the deepest emotional pattern, it's not necessarily a fear pattern, for example. A fear pattern would be very, very different. It has all that survival energy. It sort of transcends. It often doesn't, you can't feel it emotionally. A fear pattern is often something that pushes you out into your mental body. So this is very different. It's an emotional pattern. And all emotional patterns, of course, engage our emotional bodies. So if we feel like we can't really feel what is the nature of this emotional pattern, just have that intention to feel into your emotional body. And just on a sort of energetic level, that interfaces through your physical. It's constantly impacting your physical. If we're female, we tend to have our physical body shaped more by our emotional fluctuations and our hormonal cycles. So our bodies fluctuate a lot more. They change in response to our emotional states a lot more than the male form does. It's just the way that energy moves. So just having that intention alone to just feel your emotional body is enough as a starting place. So if you can just begin with that right now. Just let the breath access emotion. Let's just not call it emotion for a moment. So just call it feeling. So let your breath breathe into just what's here. A deep, slow inhalation. In that breath, your consciousness accesses the depths. And the exhale, there's just letting go. There's just a softening, a feeling that you don't have to barricade this anymore. You don't have to hold it together and present a role to the world. You don't have to be an image or hold that emotion back or try and push it away, or somehow now you give full permission to just feel what's here. And breathe. And breathe into it with the fullness of your presence to access it. What can be helpful for us is to just place our hands on the belly. This is quite a feeling center. For most of us, it helps us access trapped or stuck emotion. If emotion gets really stuck, what I've noticed in terms of working with people on a 1-1 healing level for the last 16 years, I've noticed that there's when emotion gets particularly trapped, you notice that the organs get stagnation as well, and particularly the water element of the body goes out. So there's often swelling, water retention, kind of inflammation patterns. There's often a dampness in the spleen, a low kidney energy. And emotional energy gets really trapped, it creates a hormonal imbalance, which then defaults into certain depressed states or just low states. So important to know that when we really get stuck in our emotions, one of the best tools we can to move through that is allowing yourself to feel it, but mobilizing, moving into dance, something fluid, or swimming, or walking out in nature, or just earthing. Often we need to just get chi and prana going to allow the transmutation of the emotion that's come up to be brought into the light of awareness. It's not to be pushed down, pushed back, ignored, denied, neglected. We need to treat this like the inner child. So we need to openly embrace it, let ourselves meet it, welcome it in, breathe into it, And then from there you can allow it to move in a way of expression. Maybe you need to dance, maybe you need to stretch, maybe you need to stomp, maybe you need to thrash something. Maybe you just need to walk out in nature or lie on the earth. Whatever it is, know that you don't have to maintain physical stillness. You can let the emotion kind of move through you. You might need just some sort of undulation movement, or just a shaking, harmonic kind of vibration. So one thing I wanted to say now with as you start to access this dimension of feeling, start to also let the physical move and express the emotion. So if you're in your own space, it's perfect, because now you can kind of go into finding the gestalt, finding the somatic movement of this emotion. So if someone were to say to you, okay, I want you now to enact out depression. I want you to enact out loss. I want to, as if it's a silent play and there's no words to describe it, I want you to show the emotion of grief. So that's exactly what we can do for ourselves now, is to access this deeper dimension of feeling, because it is the way to freedom, by allowing the body to move in the way that expresses that emotion. Allow the body to breathe, breathing into this emotion, giving it permission to be, accessing it, yielding to it, giving it space. It just needs to be heard. It just needs to be listened to. And that means on a physical kinesthetic sense as well. So maybe it's just a very subtle movement. Maybe it's just the blinking of the eye or a nodding of the head. Find a way now that you can authentically express the emotion that you're starting to access. And you'll know when you're being false. You'll know when it's like forced or dramatized or sort of somehow not authentic. You'll know that, and that's part of the healing as well, to recognize, how can I let this authentic expression arise and give it real space and permission? And there's a communication that opens beyond words, like a body dialogue starts to open up. And it's a tremendous amount of freedom where you can really just allow the emotional communication. You dialogue it through your body, or maybe you're going to use sound. Maybe that's more authentic for you than using a physical movement or expression. Find out what works for you and start to access that now. So you might want to close your eyes and just access it through breath. And then a movement starts to arise, a sense of something moving through, something opening up, something that's been trapped coming out. And you want to just allow this. So that's where this inner sort of quality of embracing the inner child comes in, that theme of like an eternal, present, open mother that just embraces what is. Call this emotion out from the dark. Elicit its real communication. What does it want to say? And first of all, what does it want to say through the body? Communicating through feeling, through that presence of touch, through that movement. And it has rhythm as well. So bring in that dimension. It might be a fast, hard movement. It might be a really heavy, slow, lethargic movement. It might be just a groaning, aching, very primal, raw, guttural movement. And allow it. If it looks ugly, let it be ugly. Don't try and make it a performance of any kind. It's just you and yourself, like authentically giving voice to this. So take your time. Take all the time you need. And keep dropping in. Let yourself receive the healing. Remember, the breath can be like a key that opens the door. The breath can really deeply unlock that trapped emotion, and we want it to come through. Ultimately, you want to be free of this. But we're not doing it from the place of, I have to get this out. It's more not looking for this intense catharsis, it's more, I want to find out what's real. Is it true? Like a curiosity to discover its nature, and let that communicate through the form, let that communicate through breath. Use sound if you need to. And it might be minimal, this movement, this opening, or it might be huge and expansive. And the deeper we go with this, the more that you sort of just relax into this unwinding. You might notice even like the fascia start to unwind itself, that ocean on the body, just or throughout the body, moving, unwinding with that. And notice that you can use the breath. There's some extension that comes in, some lengthening on the exhale. The inhale is sort of a drawing in and accessing, and the exhale is certain lengthening, extension, letting go. So whatever emotion is there with it, kind of you're breathing into it, opening to it, bringing light of awareness inside of it, accessing it. And the out breath is like unwinding it, expressing it, letting it go, moving through. And you just continue this for a while. And then you can come to a deeper sort of honesty or integrity where you can just find out, what's it saying? This emotion, it has thought forms connected to it. They might have been very subconscious. It has belief systems attached to it. So can you access them now? So this second practice, and it's more of a subtler dimension, is to now give it expression through finding out what's it saying. So as an example, let's say abandonment. You get into the deeper belief system behind its sort of modes of survival, and then it just sort of says, I'm going to be left alone and unloved, unwanted. And there's a fear aspect to it, but there's also a very deep pain of abandonment, a sense of being rejected from the source of love. So it might just have thoughts around, don't leave me. It could be anything, and it doesn't even need to make sense. Just see now if you can attune yourself to that real meeting of those subconscious thought forms, those programs, those belief systems, just those inner dialogues around this emotion. It could be something as simple as, I just don't want to feel that, I don't want to feel that, I don't want to feel that. It could be anything, but it's on loop. And we don't necessarily catch this on a day-to-day level. This is your time to catch this, to awaken through it, because this whole healing course is not just about clearing and transmuting. It's also about awakening through those core identifications. So that means that the awakeness, the presence, that divine presence that is your true nature, this that is the stillness, the vastness, is actually meeting the little sense of separate I that's holding on to this emotional piece until it goes all the way in and through. And then the clearing work is clearing up all the conditioned consciousness around that, all the habits in all realms, in all dimensions, through all your bodies. So many levels, karmically and genetically and energetically, so that all that space is integrated as well. So we need that laser beam of truth to really go through this, the willingness to really catch, what am I believing in here? Because the emotion feels so real. It takes over and we go down those rabbit tunnels because we're really believing in the thoughts that are triggering them. It comes down to that. So we need to find out and go directly to inquire, what are those thoughts? Where am I telling myself I'm unloved and unwanted? Maybe that's the deepest issue. I'm unloved, I'm unwanted. Nobody loves me. That lack of self-love, maybe we just keep hearing it behind the surface that I'm no good, whatever it is. Bring it out to the light now, like bring it up. Be honest about it. Even though our spiritual selves will be going like, my God, of course that's not true, it's not real. We're not looking to censor this. We're looking to be ruthlessly honest with that inner child place. That's how it feels. That's what it communicates. And it might just be something stuck on a loop you don't even believe in anymore, but it's just on its own program. So the healing helps clear up all those places that just haven't come into this full light of awakeness. So this might take many hours. And I would suggest this is probably for the second night of the healing. I'm giving you the audio file on one, but you could at any point stop this and just do that work and return to it at a later point. You choose when you want to listen to this or if you need its support. So then the third practice that we can go into is a little bit deeper now than what I was mentioning before, but is actually accessing it through sound. Is to find a primal, guttural, authentic sound that vocalizes without words, without cerebral information, without sort of analyzing or psychoanalysis, just a very raw, what does this emotion sound like? If I just let it communicate, what does it sound like? And don't be tempted to use words at this point, just tones, just sound, raw sound. Not that it has to sound nice or sound like anything that's known. Maybe those will come first and you kind of get them out of the way. But just start to sort of let yourself come into that place where you just give it sound. And maybe it just feels stunted and you can't even speak. And just staying in that authentic presence of the just like feeling stunted, like held back, like you can't express it through sound. Maybe just relaxing into that is part of the healing of it. Is just stunted, breathless, no space, no voice, nothing comes out, and that's okay. And you just relax into that, let it be, and see if something else wants to come. Or you might start with a sound, like just sort of and it might just sort of move into a sort of like who knows. So just see if you can kind of follow the sound as well. And at a certain point it will naturally just sort of die away. But see if you can stay with it as long as possible, because sometimes something mysterious happens. I would suggest that you stay with it enough to just keep discovering what wants to come out of the depths. Like the primal, authentic birthing of this. It's like if you could let it all go with the sound, what would the sound be? How would it sound? So just begin that practice now. And you've got to kind of really let go of the censorship of like, oh, someone might hear this, or you just have to be really raw here and willing to expose yourself to the self, the real self that's aware of this. So that's the third exercise. The fourth exercise you want to find a way now of finding what it's looking for. So it means we need to open an inquiry. We have to ask it questions. Like, I'm going to throw some questions out there, but you might come up with your own ones. Like, where does this come from? Let's say we're taking a pattern of depression. Where does this come from? So maybe you have memories that come back, flashes of memories, and you go with those. And I would suggest maybe just vocalizing them aloud or writing them down, like, okay, this comes from here, or maybe just sharing that if you're with someone else. Just sort of finding out, okay, where does this come from? And if that question doesn't work, then looking at where you've noticed it play out. So for example, if you don't even feel that emotion right now, maybe it's just going to go, well, I know the healing is working on this issue, let's say, depression, but right now I don't feel depressed, but I can see where I have been in the past. I've seen how it's played out. So then you can play back a story, a scenario to access it, of seeing how your body moved, how you interacted, what you said, what you believed in, how you saw life then, what effects that had, how the body felt, not just the feeling emotional sense, but how did the body feel then? Recalling that. Go through a step by process of recalling how that was, like the full kinesthetic memory of that emotion. And then look about how you came out of it. This is something perhaps we never really look at. Okay, well, that changed then, and then something else happened. So we can see the impermanence of it. We can see how it's not fixed. It can't actually be who and what we are because it's constantly in change. It's not permanent. So if it's in constant flux, it's constant change, and there's something that's been aware all along, that has been unchanging, ever present, while this motion has been playing out, with all its psychological impact, with all its changing phenomena. There's something that's remained ever present and aware. And we start to open to this, while you've been witnessing all that play of memory and accessing the story of where you've seen that emotion playing out and what it's done and its effect. See it to the nth degree, follow it all the way through, be willing to expose its whole structure, its whole play, all its ways of creating its sense of false sense of self and reality. You can see it now as a fictitious sense of self. You can see its whole identity. Really see how it's played out, how it's sort of masked and shaped your personality. This may take a while to really deconstruct that whole program. When you've really truly gone through that access, then the next step, perhaps towards the end of the healing, more when we move into the catch-up phase on the night of the 2nd on Friday, you can now come into this process where everything is going to start to be catching up. So now you can imagine, you can ask yourself the question, whose emotion is this? Let's take the issue of grief. Whose grief is this? Whose grief is this? We definitely have, with full presence, in full validity, you felt the experience of grief. It's definitely felt very real. But who's it felt real for? Who's owning this grief? As an example. And then you could say, well, it's me. It's my grief. I know it's my grief. Then find out and ask whose grief is that? Who is the I that's owning that grief? Let's say the grief is like a weather system. It's a cloud, it's a storm passing through a heavy, thick cloud. It's raining. But it's passing through. It's always passing through. So what is it that's identifying to that emotional state? Because it's a state. It's changing. It has physiological, energetic impact, no doubt. But that is changing. All of it's changing. So can you let yourself experience that changing state, but still know your nature is the sky-like nature. It's the unperturbed sky. All the weather systems going on. It's ever present here. So when you ask that question, whose grief is this? What do you get? What's the answer that you find? Follow that response. Follow where it says, oh, it's mine, it's me, oh, it's here, it's in the body, it's whose body? Keep going deeper. Don't stop at any of the answers. Keep following. Let's say it goes, well, this is my grief. And well, how do you know it's your grief? Oh, because I can feel it here. It's like here. So okay, you can feel it like in these lungs, in these lung points, impacting the heart. Okay, so who's feeling that? Well, me, the body. So you can't be the body if you're aware of the body. So what's prior to the body? The body sensation of the grief, let's say. Well, a sense of someone, a sense of, where is that? I don't know. It's just looking. What's looking? And you keep following. Where is that someone who owns this? Find it, hunt them down like a hunter. Keep going. And at a certain point, it's not for me to answer. Find out. And the last phase of the catch-up, then we can ask this question, okay, who would I be without this emotional identity? Who would I be without, let's say, this loss, or this remorse, or this sorrow, or this angst, this despair, this doubt, this unworthiness? We all have them, but they're constantly in change. And we settle down in them, and we build a sense of self and identity around them. We believe in them. We physiologically cling to them. So that de-enmeshment is taking place right now. So it starts with this question, who would you be without this? You've owned it for so long. Who would you actually be without it? Can you imagine? What would life look like without this? See if you can follow that thread. Notice where you want to check out and go unconscious. You don't want to go there, you don't want to see it. Just notice the emotional waves of resistance that will come up because those identities are dying. There is an ego death happening here. And there'll be lots that wants to kick up a fight about that. Let's see if you can just keep going through those. Who would you be without this identity? Or you could ask the question, what would life look like without this? And play out all the possibility. Well, I feel free, I feel happy, I feel like at peace. All these different things that could come through, but not just how you could possibly feel, but what would life look like? Well, I wouldn't be fighting with my boss in that way, or my daughter and me would have a better relationship, or I could go ahead and make that decision, or whatever it is. Look at how the infrastructure of your life, your living, your physical body, your health, your well-being, everything could possibly change when it's not looking through this particular filter that's been here, conditioning reality for so long. And you just come back to reality. Imagine, sense, feel, and really bring it in. What would life look like without this? And as we're entering in the last phase, all the catch-up work, all the repatterning work, all the integration, calibration, all that harmonizing that we're going to do in that last day will help everything create new blueprints towards living from the freedom, not from the enmeshment in that identity. So then we start to look at life through new eyes, not through that filter. And what's required is an absolute anchoring in this present moment. Because you probably noticed by now, but identification to a deep emotional pattern requires that we really go into the past. The emotional patterns are very much related to past identification, past thoughts. Whereas, let's say, fear ones often have more of a projection around the future, like frightened of what's going to happen in the future, anticipation, anxiety. Whereas emotional ones are more like, oh, this has happened and this is because of this that I'm always going to suffer, and I can't, and it just keeps returning to the past and to memory. So it really needs memory to keep that emotionality alive, and it's physical memory. Sometimes it's biological, sometimes it's genetic, it's physiological. So acknowledging all those levels and going through that with the healing level, there's so much to the conditioned consciousness that's there. That's why it really requires energetic engineering, which is what we're undergoing in this healing process. That's why it's not just an audio file, there's a real in-depth transformation taking place. So you honour that process. You give it space, you acknowledge it, you need time for that to filter through into the life and living level. But know now, but by the end here, we're going to be positively repatterning. We're going to be imagining and living and starting to integrate into life without that, looking through that looking glass. So for example, if the pattern was grief, then the positive repatterning will start to come in as a sense of awakening joy. If the pattern was abandonment, then a felt sense of wholeness and oneness will start to come through. If the pattern was sadness, the feeling of just happiness and contentment can start to come through. So this phase, we can really call in that possibility of awakening to those divine qualities which are absolute innate nature. When we really return to the self, all those qualities awaken and enliven. So while that phase is going through, I want to suggest in the last healing that you receive on the Friday that you can use the mantra Ma Om. So you're mostly familiar with this, but it's really just drawing Ma, which means unconditional love from the in-breath, and emanating, radiating out love on the out-breath as light. So love on the in-breath, light on the out-breath. Om just means truth or light. So you let your whole system radiate that out. Because when we get stuck in emotional patterns, one of the first things that happens, we get very self, I, me, separate orientated. We can't serve the whole. We can't radiate love. We feel we're in lack of love. All the emotional patterns come down to that place where we feel we're in lack of love. We're outside of love. Because I'm unworthy, because I'm inadequate, or because I'm to blame, because I'm bad, because I'm guilty, whatever it is. All those things, it's about where we're blocking love, where we're blocking the divine, where we're blocking our true nature. So this is a real reclaiming now. This phase is saying, I come back to myself. I come back to what is real and true, to the reality of being, this presence that's here, looking through you. And when you notice those waves of the habit of mind to return into those rabbit tunnels, just know that you don't need to go there anymore, because you're not identified to that pattern. It's like just a wave, a weather system, and you welcome it. It's just another energy. You don't need to tell it it's wrong or it shouldn't be there. It's just a passing cloud. You greet it, like Rumi says, like a visitor, laughing, smiling at the door. And you let it pass through, and it will do. And now it won't get stuck. It will keep passing. So as we're integrating, we use the Ma on the in-breath, Om on the out-breath. And you're really like a plant absorbing the light of love into every cell, and really particularly into those places that were holding the emotional pain, into the heart, into the belly, into the kidneys, into those places where we felt there wasn't any love in the form. And we bridge love back into the form as the sound healing vibration restructures our whole consciousness, all our energy system, with deep, deep healing work that's taking place. We go through that whole renovation, and the exhale, light, truth, radiance, insight dawns and spreads and benefits the whole, and it will benefit the whole. And you'll notice the power to give, that energy for life can come fully through, because it got impacted, impeded by this emotional position. You didn't know how much energy it was taking up. You didn't know how much it conditioned your reality. You didn't know how much it veiled you from the truth. It stopped you seeing reality as it was, and it made you feel cut off from the divine. So all of that is being transformed. You're going through a process of renewal through having gone through this death. So in the last phases of the meditation, in the last phase of the healing, on the last night, this is where you can just reclaim your true nature. Using the Ma Om. Eventually the sound will just fall into silence, and there just will be this opening to surrender. And this is where the deepest movement of opening to divine grace, of true surrender, can open and crack us open. So we'll see what will happen. It's the big unknown. But expect a miracle, because anything is possible. And then I hope to take your photos up to Amma to be blessed, the Darshan, in a few days. So with all these different processes I've offered, all the different techniques, break them down, stop the audio at any point. They're there for pieces to work through over the 4 days and the 5 days in total we have together. They don't have to all be listened to in one. So take it, digest it, apply it, utilize it where you need. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being a part of this, and that integrity to return to your real, whole, true self. And close with the closing prayers. Join me if you wish. Om Asatoma Satgamaya Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya Mrityoma Amritam Gamaya Om Shanti 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 Om Lokaha Samastaha Sukhino Bhavantu Lokaha Samastaha Sukhino Bhavantu Lokaha Samastaha Sukhino Bhavantu Om Shanti 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 Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha Harihi Om.